Hello everyone, welcome to our AI show where myself and Kevin Kieller will be digging into some of the latest news headlines from around the globe. Now this time we have curated some stories. We've got some really interesting topics that have been discussed out there in the news right now. So really excited to dig into some of these stories today. Kevin, how are you today?
I am doing very well, and this is really me. It's not an avatar, but we're going to talk about that because there's a lot of fake AI out there, both from an audio and video perspective. And I think of the news that we've curated is going to hit on those topics.
So it's kind of like the fake news show today, Kevin. Is that what you're saying? There's definitely a running theme of fakes in this.
That's right. This is the fake AI show episode. So there you go.
Well, okay. Well, look, you've picked out 3 stories for me. I've picked out 3 stories for you. So it should get interesting because we've got very much a kind of thread of fake and AI kind of avatars and all sorts happening today. So let's dig into the first story. So I'm going to hit you with a recent story that was talking about Meta.
Right.
And it's reevaluated its approach to labeling AI-generated posts on Instagram after lots of complaints have been received. Now, I found this interesting because, things are getting now labeled with AI or made with AI. And I was keen to Kevin to kind of just understand, where do we end up with this? We're going to be using AI in communications, which we are now, right? Meeting summaries and all this kind of thing. And maybe, AI-generated kind of avatars in meetings might even be attending for us one day. Do we expect things to be labeled? Where are we heading with this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, Rob. I mean, we've talked in previous episodes about, Zoom wants you to send avatars that aren't you and maybe hundreds or thousands of them to simultaneous meetings. And we've talked as well about the importance of reviewing AI-generated information to make sure it's correct. So certainly, this story with Instagram was all about, okay, images that were created with AI, they were labeling it as AI. But then photographers said, well, wait a second. I just used like Adobe Photoshop, which has some AI tools. Maybe I just did something that wasn't even, I cropped it. It wasn't even something that was in the frame. And now you're saying that this was made with AI, right? Now, I think subsequently they've updated the label to say AI info, or they changed the wording based on the feedback from the photographers because, my daughter's a professional photographer and every photograph, gets retouched in some manner. And I think a lot of these tools, there's an industry standard around trying to label the tools if they're AI generated. But I think, this is an example where it was overly aggressive. And so I think it really speaks to, and we'll explore this in the other news stories, the challenge, right? Because it's like what is that, a false positive? You say it was generated by AI, but the photographer says, no, I actually took this picture. So how do you know what's real and what's fake? That's, I think, the theme of this show. So very interesting. I don't know. What were your thoughts on that story?
Yeah, I think just to round that off, I think it's, where do you start and stop with this? Because if let's say I write a blog and I do use, AI to generate a section of it. Right. Should I be labeling that as AI, generated content? It's kind of where do you start and stop it? Just like whether you've, edited a photo. So, I think it's going to get interesting, isn't it? Where do we label AI generated content? Is it everywhere? What's
the rule? No, I think it's going to be very interesting over the next several years.
We all want transparency ultimately, don't we? But really, are we going to label everything with AI? Because potentially everything's going to have some kind of AI influence over time, isn't it? So
no, that you're exactly right.
Yeah. Well, let's keep our feet firmly on the ground and move on to story number 2. Kevin, I found this one quite interesting as well. Character.ai has launched a groundbreaking feature that lets users make phone calls to AI avatars. So this new capability that's been released, which supports multiple languages, including English, Spanish, and Chinese, aims to enhance user interaction by offering seamless transitions between calls and text messages. I mean, it's got various other features, but I thought this was really quite interesting. That what do you think? How do you how did you soak this up?
Yeah, so I appreciated you sharing this because, like in the world of AI, you can't keep up with everything, and so I wasn't familiar with it. So, as part of you sharing this, I went and I conversed with some of these characters, right? And so I chose Socrates. And I suggested that the world was flat, and using the Socratic method, he asked me some questions to try to prove that I was wrong. It was very compelling. And what I would say is I also looked at the stats, and at least some people are suggesting that the growth of Character AI and the engagement is actually faster than ChatGPT, which is often held out as one of the fastest, commercial growing applications. Like I was looking, and I think it was saying now that there's like 9 million daily active users that spend about a half an hour a day conversing with these characters. And you can do it through a chat and it'll speak to you. Or as you said, you can just actually place a phone call. And it's pretty good in terms of latency. So it feels like you're talking to somebody, and you can go create your own character. So I could go create a Rob Scott UC today, and you could give it a bit of a backstory, and then it responds kind of in that way. And you can pick a particular voice or even add your own voice to it. So, I do think, and a bunch of, the article focused on just how increasingly, for a while, everybody was texting and nobody was making phone calls. But I think that there's some stats to suggest that voice memos and voice is now, even with the younger set, is now coming back. So this type of interaction using voice with an AI character, whether it's for information or just for entertainment, obviously Character.ai is onto something. So I think that's fascinating. Now, what does that mean in the business context? I think this comes back to, do we create these as IT help desks, HR help desks, from an internal perspective, a little bit safer, and then potentially, although a little bit more risky, is having it be more of that customer service. Do you call in and just chat with, I don't know, the AI Starbucks barista or something? And but certainly I think there's a lot of experimentation, and it was a lot of fun, right? So when I tried it.
Yeah, and the numbers are huge, aren't they? And you kind of think, well, is voice potentially going to make a revival here? Powered by AI, which is already happening, as you say, in the customer engagement space, CX space. Really exciting, really, really interesting to see how voice is being used in the modern world of AI. So, moving on to my third story, before we dive into yours. This one is quite close to my heart because I think it was the UC predictions just gone in the end of 2023. I made a prediction about voice notes, and I believe voice notes are going to get big. And this article actually kind of reinforces that there seems to be a huge increase in voice messages or voice notes. But it seems to be a new frontier for cyber criminals. And this story kind of goes into, I suppose, the how voice notes are being kind of manipulated by cyber criminals for scamming and that kind of thing. So I found this really, really interesting. And I think the stat was amongst Gen Z, 84% use voice notes. And I think that's a really quite a notable statistic. What do you think?
Yeah, so that was I was alluding to that in the last kind of story, and yeah, I think that like voice is perceived as more authentic, but the problem is that I was looking at, you know, in Q1 of 2024, there was like 245% more deep fake audio and video. They didn't break it down, so deep fake audio and video from the previous year, and certainly creating a deep fake of audio is a lot easier. And it used to be like you needed like 20 minutes, right? You'd have to like, because I had created a voice thing in Descript or something. You needed like 20 minutes of your voice to generate something that sounded like you. But now it's like down to seconds. So, you know, anybody like our recordings, anybody that has a podcast, anybody who's recorded anything, potentially their voice could be cloned. And, you know, and of course the cyber criminals are using them, you know, they have like, you know, a child calling a parent and claiming something and, you know, that they're, and send money. And of course, you know, that emotional tie with the voice is obviously much, much stronger than, you know, just like a text message, right? So, yeah, so I think it's, you know, voice is increasing, and I think the authenticity of voice, it gets that emotional connection. So it's unfortunate, but it's not surprising that cyber criminals are kind of latching onto that.
I find this really interesting because years and years ago, we thought, you know, when AI finally comes, there's going to be lots of robots walking around with, you know, talking to us and that kind of thing. And actually AI is predominantly software, isn't it? You can't see it. And what this does, I think it really shines a light on the fact that, you know, the fact that we do need to label AI generated content. Again, you know, we've got to be able to trust it, haven't we? Otherwise, we're just going to lose faith in everything. So, you're going back to that first story. How do we label these conversations? How do we authenticate these conversations? I suppose that's a job for these compliance and security companies, I suppose, but and the tech vendors out there. But you know, big challenge, I would imagine, going forward. What do you think?
Well, I absolutely think it is the case. And, you know, you see this kind of this cat and mouse game, which brings me to really my first story that I sent over, where it was, I think it was Columbia University that has a new tool that detects, they say, AI generated videos with about a 94%, you know, accuracy. So, this seems like a good thing to me. What did you think of the article?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's quite a few acronyms in there. So first, I suppose just to kind of set the scene on this story, this new innovation, they've called it DIVID, DIVID. It's a tool that detects AI-generated videos, as you mentioned, up to 93.7% accuracy.
I think I rounded it up to 94, but yes. More accurate.
So I've just got it written down on the screen here. So I had to have this one on the screen. I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be hard to remember. But I suppose, why does this matter? As kind of AI-generated content, you know, continues to become, I suppose, more sophisticated, the tools like this, DIVID, are going to be crucial, aren't they, in preventing fraud going forward? You know, protecting our organizations is a must, and I think maintaining that trust in digital media is absolutely paramount. So lots of applications for this DIVID tool. I suppose the real-time detection on platforms like, for example, Zoom,
right,
would absolutely highlight its importance of safeguarding enterprises against, you know, AI-driven deception. So that's kind of how I see it. Another great tool, but you know, we know lots of compliance companies in the UC space as well, and I'm just wondering, kind of, you know, is this any different to what they're already doing, or is this a real step on? What
Well, I think it is I think it is different, and especially now people now if we move to like the business setting, people are talking about I have so many meetings, so I'm not going to attend the meeting, so maybe I'll read the AI recap and maybe I'll watch the AI, the highlights. Like some of the UC tools do a good job of saying, here's the key, parts you can watch, kind of like a sports highlight reel. But what happens when those are faked, right? And, in an organization, I think, whether you say Zoom or WebEx or Teams or any of the other platforms, having something built in that kind of gives it either the stamp of approval or the, hey, this might have been doctored. I think that's going to become increasingly important. In some of the articles, other articles I read, it's like, what about court cases? In some recent court cases, whether it's audio or video segments that were recorded, what happens when those have been doctored? You certainly would want to be able to detect that, right? So I think increasingly, we're going to see tools like this DIVID tool become important. It's just a question of, does AI advance faster than the detection tools or vice versa, right? So
that's a good point.
I think it's going to be it is going to be that bit of the AI arms race, and hopefully the good guys will win out, but we'll have to see. Now this next story is really, I found this interesting. There was like two articles. And what I found interesting is that, so for, the Olympics, we have the NBC has decided that they're going to use the voice of a sportscaster, to provide independently targeted updates, but in his voice, and they can send out, like things that are of specific interest to you. Now, obviously, this is a sportscaster who's alive, so he could do this, but he obviously couldn't target it. So even he said he was initially intrigued, and then it was a little bit scary. He said it was like, it only got like 2% mistakes. They trained it on his previous, broadcasts and what have you. So there was that story where NBC is leaning into it. And then there was a similar story where in Australia specifically, they were saying, we think that AI is going to replace like 5,000 voiceover actors. So you have, kind of NBC leaning into it, and then Australia saying it's going to get rid of jobs. So I thought that was an interesting dichotomy, those two articles. What do you think? Is NBC, this whole actor, and screenwriters strike was about being concerned about this AI use, and here we have it. So what were your thoughts on those two articles, Rob?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one that kind of, just if we just zoom out for a second, I suppose there's already tension, as we know, very early on there was tension between, the tech market and, everyone else trying to preserve human, elements in various industries. We saw protests in, I think it was Hollywood, wasn't it, with the screenwriters, and we've got it in the arts, and we've got it in filmmaking, and blah, 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 blah. But what I find interesting is that, do we evolve with AI, and therefore might Al Michaels, the sportscaster, license his voice to the NBC network, and therefore he doesn't have to work anymore because he's licensed his voice, or he goes off and does something else. Do you know what I mean? I'm wondering, kind of, is it going to put people out of a job, or is it just going to change the way they do their job or the way they work? So interesting. Al Michaels possibly could be in a number of places going forward, licensing his voice potentially for more than one thing at the same time. But I don't know. It's really interesting. But I don't have the answer to this one, Kevin. But job displacement, it's going to happen, isn't it? But job enhancement, I'm a real kind of believer that AI will enhance, a lot of job roles as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I didn't expect you to have the answer, but it would be great if you did. But I do think, yeah, there's going to be this consolidation. So here, Al Michaels, like I guess if he licensed it in a way that is beneficial to him, that's great. If they say, thank you, we don't need you anymore because, we now have this AI voice, that's not so good. And I think that was the primary concern. It's like, okay, if I can create an avatar, if I can create your voice, and if somehow without you knowing it, you sign away those rights, and then I say, no, that's okay. I've got a digital model of you, Rob. So we don't need you to host the show. It's Kevin and the Rob Scott AI bot on the AI show. That becomes a different story, right? So
it becomes an IP or licensing kind of regulation kind of issue, doesn't it? Because
right.
Did Al Michaels grant permission for the network to use his voice? Well, if he did, then he possibly, earned out of it. But if they just steal his voice, like OpenAI got into trouble with Scarlett Johansson recently by reproducing her voice. And it was so similar that effectively, they pulled that voice from the OpenAI AI platform. I found that interesting, but I suppose it does. This has got to play out in regulations, surely.
Well, and I think, and if we move it into kind of the business context, where the different UC platforms are doing, facial recognition, voice recognition, you record your voice to do voice isolation so it can kind of cut out everybody except you when you're in maybe a shared space. Now, the issue becomes, where is your voice? Does your organization have your voice profile? And depending on your role, let's say you leave the organization, does the organization have the right to somehow, because you didn't have a lawyer and you signed the employment contract, could they use your voice in different ways that you never really intended, right? And so I think that's, what happens. I'm sure Al Michaels, because it was a big story and, kind of he's a well-known figure, I'm sure that he did it with full consent and there's a good IP relationship, but, and legal agreement. But I think in the broader context, it'll be interesting because not everybody, kind of is aware of what can be done, right? So, yeah. So I think that'll be interesting. Now, this is the last story that I had from you, and it kind of moves off this kind of fake story. But there was Mustafi Suleyman, who we talked about before. He now is the AI chief, president of AI at Microsoft. He was recently quoted in this article talking about how his belief is if you put something up on your website, it's effectively free game to be used by any AI model for training. And I think not everybody was in agreement with that. So you read that article. What was your thoughts on that?
Look, I'm in the media business. We create content every day. We put it on the web. We expect that gets gobbled up by Google's, search crawl, bots and crawlers and that kind of thing, and ingested into these huge platforms. And OpenAI, didn't build ChatGPT itself, did it? It's been educated by everything that's on the World Wide Web. So I think it's a fact of life that we're going to have to accept that, whatever's on the internet is fair game to a degree. But it does shine a light on, the fact that we need clearer regulations and ethical guidelines, I think, for, AI development and how it consumes content from the public domain. So it's a tough one, but, again, I think we need to see regulations on this one, Kevin. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting because obviously, like as a media company, we would love that this episode, that other people find it and watch it. And so from a search perspective, you want to be found, right? So you do this whole search engine optimization. You're actually working hard to be found. So you create meta tags and what have you on your web pages. I think it's interesting for me. What I thought is, okay, but then from a training data perspective, right, there are also tags that you can put on your HTML page that, and they're not honored by all the kind of, training ingestion engines, but you can say, hey, don't use this content to train your AI. And, I think what was interesting to me was I was just thinking, okay, organizations, when they're putting out public information, do they choose to be, yes, searchable because they want to be found, but are they going to increasingly put tags to try to say, hey, without our explicit permission, don't use this to train an AI model? And especially, what happens when you start to put, I don't know, reviews or other kind of customer quotes, right? And you tell customers, we're not using your data to train our AI models, but do you have a responsibility to also say, hey, we're also doing what we can to prevent your data inadvertently, getting ingested and training some other AI model, right? So, I think it generally is free game to your point, but I think that, I expect probably the EU will lead with some regulations in this specific regard, right?
Yeah, I'm sure they will. And I think it goes back to the original story that we talked about again. It's labeling, it's legitimacy, authenticity, and verification. We do need some rules here, some regulations that say how we're going to do this, because otherwise, our content isn't going to be cited correctly, and it effectively will be plagiarized and used for whatever purpose, whether it is commercial purpose or personal use. Things should be recognized if it's on the World Wide Web. So, this one's going to be an interesting one to watch. I think we, recently spoke to Scott and Kevin, didn't we, about data protection and that kind of thing. But I think this is going to be such an interesting topic going forward. So we'll keep an eye on that one, Kevin.
No, absolutely. And I guess then, with full disclosure, this was produced with no AI added, at least on my end. I don't know. Is that so? But
Good
with
stuff.
that,
let's talk about. Well, let's have an AI minute, Kevin. Let's break off to talk about and learn about another word in the world of AI. What's this week's word?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about hear about AI alignment or just alignment, and so I wanted to talk about that. And really, quite simply, that's the extent to which an AI system does what you want, right? So it fulfills either a person or a group, your intended goal, preferences, and it does it, kind of within your ethical principles, right? And last time I talked about kind of the opposite of this, which is hallucinations, because that's not your goal, where, AI is making up stuff, right? So, why is alignment important? Well, there's a couple things. I think probably all technical people are familiar with Terminator and Skynet. That happened in the movie. It happened in 1997. So thankfully we're past that. But that's where, in the Terminator series, AI became effectively aware and decided that, to eradicate humans. So clearly that wasn't aligned. Nick Bostrom in 2014, he was a philosopher, and he came up with this paperclip problem. So you can go Google it and we'll put a link to it. But the idea is, if you create an AI that, wants to create paperclips, eventually it may decide that all the resources of the world, need to be consumed to create more and more paperclips. So even though that one is aligned to the goal you've given it, like create the most paperclips, it becomes problematic because without ethical boundaries, maybe it decides to eradicate humans, or I don't know, use humans in some way, to as slave labor to create paper clips, which clearly wasn't intended. And as I mentioned, without alignment, a lot of these models are incented to give an answer, even if they don't really have any data to back up the answer. And we've seen that in court cases where it'll create citations to cases that didn't exist because it's trying to back things up, right? So alignment is important because it really means that the AI systems are doing what we intend them to do. And once again, within the bounds of kind of these ethical constraints. So when you hear about AI alignment or hear about different organizations arguing that there needs to be more focus on AI alignment, if you're interested in AI meeting goals, then I think you want to understand and kind of be on the side of yes, AI alignment is important. So that's today's AI Minute.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Kevin, it's been awesome riffing on some of this AI stuff with you today. I mean, lots here, lots we've talked about, lots to come, I'm sure, as well. But thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for watching our AI show. If you've got some good takeaways from today's session, do give us a quick mention on social, and you can connect with Kevin and myself on LinkedIn, and our links are in the description. Thanks for watching.